They tried to sell her silence. She walked away with her daughter and her name. The gunshot echoed across the canyon before Linda Hayes could react. Dust kicked up near her horse's hooves as she pulled hard on the reins, her 8-year-old daughter Claire screaming behind her in the saddle. 3 riders emerged from behind the red rocks, their faces covered with bandanas, rifles pointed straight at them. Linda recognized the lead horse immediately. It belonged to her husband's business partner, George Miller. "Hand over the girl, Linda," George shouted, his voice muffled but unmistakable. "This doesn't have to get messy." Linda's hand moved to the pistol at her hip, but she knew the odds. 3 armed men against a woman and child in open terrain. She'd been riding hard since dawn, trying to reach the county courthouse in Silver Ridge before the land deed hearing at noon. The papers in her saddlebag proved that her late husband, Jake, had never signed over the ranch to George's company. Jake had been murdered 3 months ago, shot in the back during what the sheriff called a robbery gone wrong. Linda knew better. "My daughter stays with me," Linda called back, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine, "and my name stays on that ranch deed." George laughed, a cold sound that carried on the desert wind. "Your husband's signature is on those transfer papers, Mrs. Hayes. Been notarized and everything. Judge Henderson already saw them." "Forged papers?" Linda shot back. "I've got Jake's real will right here, and it shows the ranch goes to me and Claire. You killed him before he could file it." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. One of the other riders, a thin man Linda recognized as Pete Carson from the bank, shifted nervously in his saddle. The third man, heavy-set and unfamiliar, kept his rifle trained on Linda's chest. "Big words from a woman who's about to lose everything," George said. He nudged his horse forward, closing the distance. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to hand over those papers and the girl. We'll take Claire somewhere safe while you ride back to town and sign the ranch over properly. Once everything's legal, you get your daughter back. Simple business transaction." Linda felt Claire's small arms tighten around her waist. The girl was trembling but stayed silent, just as Linda had taught her. They'd practiced this scenario a dozen times since Jake's death, though Linda had prayed they'd never need it. In one fluid motion, Linda yanked the saddlebag loose and hurled it toward Pete Carson's horse. The animal spooked, rearing up and throwing Pete's aim off as he fired. Linda dug her heels into her horse's flanks, sending the mare surging forward toward the narrow canyon passage. Another gunshot cracked behind them, the bullet whizzing past Linda's ear. Linda's horse thundered through the winding canyon as gunfire echoed off the stone walls. She counted 5 shots behind her, which meant at least one of the men had stopped to reload. The passage opened into a wider area littered with boulders and dried brush, offering some cover but also exposing them to better firing angles. Linda veered right, putting a massive rock formation between her and the pursuers. She spotted a steep trail climbing the canyon wall to the left. It was risky, barely wide enough for a horse, but it might lead to higher ground. Before she could decide, Pete Carson emerged from the passage, his rifle up and ready. Linda jerked the reins left, and her horse leaped over a low cluster of rocks just as Pete fired. The bullet struck stone, sending chips flying. Linda drew her pistol and fired back without looking, more to keep Pete's head down than to hit anything. They crashed through brittle sagebrush and up the narrow trail, the horse's hooves scrambling for purchase on the loose shale. George and the heavy-set man burst into the clearing below. "Split up," George shouted. "Pete, you follow them up. We'll circle around and cut them off at the ridge." Linda pushed her exhausted horse harder. The animal was breathing heavily, foam flecking its mouth, but the mare kept climbing. Behind them, Pete started up the trail on foot, leading his horse and using the animal as cover. Linda reached a switchback and risked a glance down. Pete was maybe 40 yards behind, moving carefully but steadily. The trail leveled out onto a mesa covered in scrub oak and scattered pines. Linda could see for miles in every direction. To the north, Silver Ridge was visible in the distance, its church steeple catching the morning sun. So close, but still so far. To the south, the trail George and the heavy man had taken wound through lower terrain, and they were making good time. Linda spotted an old line shack ahead, a weathered structure that sheep herders had used years ago. Its roof was half collapsed, but the walls still stood. She made a decision and rode toward it, dismounting quickly and pulling Claire down beside her. "Inside, now!" Linda commanded, pushing her daughter through the crooked doorway. The interior was dim and musty, filled with ancient straw and broken tools. Linda led her horse around back and tied it to a post, then returned to the shack and took position at one of the windows. Pete reached the mesa moments later, breathing hard, his rifle ready. He'd left his horse at the bottom of the trail. Linda watched him scan the area, his eyes settling on the shack. He approached cautiously, using the trees for cover. "Mrs. Hayes!" Pete called out. "Be reasonable about this. George has the law on his side." "Judge Henderson already believes those papers are real." "Because George paid him to believe it," Linda shouted back. "You know Jake never signed anything. You were there at the bank when George tried to get Jake to sell. Jake refused him to his face." Pete was quiet for a moment, still moving closer. "Maybe so, but Jake's dead now, and dead men don't testify in court. You're fighting a losing battle." Linda kept her pistol aimed at the window, tracking Pete's movements. "I've got 3 witnesses who will swear Jake's signature was forged. The blacksmith, the telegraph operator, and old Henry from the general store. They all saw Jake's handwriting plenty of times. They'll know it's fake. Witnesses can be convinced to stay quiet," Pete said, now just 20 yards from the shack. "George has deep pockets. So that's how you sleep at night?" Linda asked. "Telling yourself it's just business while you help murder a good man and steal from his widow." Pete's face hardened. "I didn't kill Jake. That was all George." "But you're helping him finish the job," Linda said. "That makes you just as guilty." A gunshot from Pete's rifle shattered the window frame above Linda's head. She dropped low, pulling Claire down with her. "Stay down, baby," Linda whispered. She moved to another window and fired back, forcing Pete to dive behind a thick oak tree. The standoff continued for several minutes, both sides trading occasional shots. Linda knew she was running out of time. George and the heavy man would reach the mesa soon, and then she'd be surrounded. She had maybe 4 bullets left in her pistol, and her rifle was still strapped to her horse out back. "Pete," Linda called out during the lull, "you said you didn't kill Jake." "Prove it. Let us go." "Can't do that," Pete replied. "I'm in too deep now." "George would kill me if I backed out." "Then you're already a dead man," Linda said. "Because if I survive this, I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you did. Your name will be dirt in this county." Hoofbeats sounded from the south. George and his partner were arriving. Linda's stomach tightened. She had minutes at best. She looked around the shack desperately, searching for anything she could use. Her eyes fell on an old lantern hanging from a nail, still half full of kerosene. An idea formed, dangerous but possible. She grabbed the lantern and moved to the back window. Her horse was still there, calm despite the gunfire. Beyond the shack, dry grass and brush stretched toward the mesa's edge. If she could create enough smoke and confusion, they might have a chance. Linda poured the kerosene along the back wall and over the dry straw on the floor, careful to keep a path clear to the door. She pulled out a match from her pocket, one of the waterproof ones Jake had always carried. Her hand hesitated for just a moment, thinking about what she was about to do, then struck the match against the wall. The flames caught instantly, spreading faster than she'd expected. Smoke billowed up, thick and black. "Claire, out the back. Now!" Linda grabbed her daughter's hand and they ran through the rear door to the horse. Linda threw Claire up into the saddle and mounted behind her, kicking the horse into motion just as the fire reached the old timber roof. Pete came running around the side of the shack, coughing from the smoke, his rifle up. Linda fired her last 2 shots in his direction, and whether from luck or skill, one of them caught him in the shoulder. Pete spun and went down, his rifle falling into the burning brush. George and the heavy man appeared through the smoke, their horses spooked by the flames. "You crazy woman," George shouted, fighting to control his mount. "You'll burn the whole mesa." Linda didn't answer. She rode hard toward the northern edge of the mesa, where she'd spotted a game trail earlier. Behind them, the fire spread through the dry grass, smoke rising in a dark column visible for miles. Flames would alert people in Silver Ridge that something was wrong up on the mesa. Help might come, though probably not in time. The game trail descended steeply, switchbacking down the canyon wall toward flatter ground. Linda's horse picked its way carefully down the treacherous path while George and his partner tried to find another route down. The fire had cut off the main trail they'd used to come up. Halfway down, Linda heard Claire gasp. "Mama, look." Riders were coming from Silver Ridge, at least 6 of them, moving fast across the desert floor. Linda couldn't make out who they were from this distance, but someone had seen the smoke. She urged her horse faster, sending small rocks tumbling down the slope. George appeared on a parallel trail to the east, having found his own way down. He was alone now, his heavy partner presumably still trapped on the burning mesa. George kicked his horse brutally, trying to reach the bottom first, trying to cut Linda off before she could reach whoever was coming from town. It became a race, 2 riders descending separate trails toward the same point. Linda's horse stumbled once, nearly throwing them both, but the mare recovered and kept going. George was shouting something, but Linda couldn't hear him over the sound of hooves on stone and her own pounding heart. They reached the bottom within seconds of each other, their horses bursting onto the flat desert ground. The riders from town were close now, close enough for Linda to recognize Sheriff Tom Brady in the lead, along with her brother-in-law Martin Hayes and several other men from Silver Ridge. George saw them too and pulled up short, his hand dropping to his pistol. For a moment Linda thought he might actually try to shoot it out with 6 armed men. Then his shoulders sagged, and his hand moved away from his gun. The sheriff and his men surrounded them, rifles at the ready. Tom Brady, a weathered man in his 50s with steel-gray hair, looked from Linda to George and back again, taking in their disheveled appearance and Linda's obvious fear. The sheriff dismounted slowly, his hand resting on his pistol. "Somebody want to tell me what's going on here?" "We saw smoke from town and heard gunfire echoing through the canyons." Linda slid down from her horse, keeping Claire close. "George Miller and 2 of his men ambushed us on the trail to Silver Ridge. They tried to take my daughter and steal the papers proving Jake's will was legitimate." George's face reddened. "That's a lie. She's the one who stole forged documents and set fire to the mesa. I was trying to stop her from making things worse." "Then why were you shooting at her?" Martin Hayes stepped forward, his face hard with anger. "My brother's been dead 3 months, and you've been circling Linda's ranch like a vulture ever since." "I have legitimate business interests," George protested. "Jake signed papers before he died selling me his land. I've got documents, all legal and proper." "Forged documents," Linda said firmly. She reached into her vest and pulled out a folded packet of papers, singed at the edges but intact. "This is Jake's real will, written 2 weeks before he died. It leaves everything to me and Claire." He never signed anything over to George. Sheriff Brady took the papers and examined them carefully. His eyes narrowed as he read. "This looks like Jake's handwriting. I've seen his signature plenty of times on official documents. Of course it looks like his handwriting," George said desperately. "That's what a good forger does. She probably paid someone to make those after Jake died." "Then let's settle this proper," the sheriff said. "We'll take both sets of documents to Judge Henderson and let him decide which is real. We've got a handwriting expert passing through Silver Ridge this week, fellow who works for the territorial government. He can examine both signatures." George's face went pale. "That's not necessary. My documents have already been notarized." "By Walter Price, who happens to be your cousin," Martin pointed out. "Funny how that worked out." The sheriff's eyes hardened. "Where are the other 2 men who were with you, George?" "I don't know what you're talking about," George said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Pete Carson from the bank and another man," Linda said. "Pete's back on the mesa with a bullet wound in his shoulder." "I shot him when he tried to kill me and my daughter. The 3rd man, I don't know his name, but he's probably still up there too." Sheriff Brady gestured to 2 of his deputies. "Ride up and find them. Bring them back alive if possible." He turned back to George. "You're under arrest for attempted kidnapping and assault. We'll add more charges once we sort out this mess with the land papers." "You can't arrest me," George shouted. "I'm a respected businessman." "Judge Henderson will never allow this. Judge Henderson might have his own questions to answer if it turns out he was part of this," the sheriff said coldly. He nodded to another deputy who moved forward with iron shackles. George's hand suddenly dropped to his pistol. Time seemed to slow as he drew the weapon, swinging it toward Linda and Claire. Martin tackled Linda sideways, covering her and Claire with his body as multiple gunshots rang out. George's pistol fired once, the bullet going wide and striking the ground near the horses. The deputy's return fire was immediate and accurate. George jerked backward as 3 bullets hit him in the chest. He stayed in the saddle for a moment, his eyes wide with shock and pain, then toppled sideways and hit the ground hard. His horse bolted, dragging George's foot that was still caught in the stirrup for several yards before the boot came loose. Sheriff Brady rushed over and knelt beside George, checking for a pulse. He looked up and shook his head. "He's gone." Linda sat up slowly, her ears ringing from the gunshots. Claire was crying, her face buried in Martin's shoulder. Linda pulled her daughter close, her own hands shaking with delayed reaction to everything that had happened. "You did what you had to do," Martin said quietly to his sister-in-law. "Jake would be proud of how you protected Claire." The sheriff walked over, his face grave. "I'm going to need full statements from both of you. This is going to be a complicated investigation." "I understand," Linda said. "But first, I need to get Claire somewhere safe. She's been through too much today." "Take her to the hotel," Sheriff Brady said. "I'll have someone stand guard outside your room. Once we round up Pete Carson and the other fellow, we'll get everyone's story straight." Martin helped Linda and Claire onto his horse. "I'll take them to town, Tom. You can question us there." As they rode away from the scene, Linda looked back once at George's body, covered with someone's coat, lying in the dust where he'd fallen. She felt no satisfaction in his death, only a hollow exhaustion. The fight wasn't over yet. There would still be the legal battle over the land, the investigation into Jake's murder, and the question of how deep the corruption went in Silver Ridge. But for now, Claire was safe, and Linda still had the papers that proved their rights. That was enough to keep going. They reached Silver Ridge an hour later, riding slowly down Main Street as curious townspeople gathered to watch. Word of the confrontation had already spread, carried by early risers who'd seen the smoke and heard the distant gunfire. Linda held her head high despite her dusty, disheveled appearance and Claire's tear-stained face. The hotel manager, a stout woman named Margaret Fuller, met them at the door with concerned eyes. "Land sakes, Linda Hayes, you look like you've been through a war. Get that child upstairs right now. I'll have hot water sent up for baths and food prepared." "Thank you, Margaret," Linda said gratefully. "We'll need 2 rooms. Martin will be staying to help with the investigation." "You'll have the best rooms in the house," Margaret declared. "Nobody messes with my customers and gets away with it." While Claire soaked in a hot bath, Linda stood at the window looking down at the street. She could see people gathering in small groups, talking and gesturing. The news about George Miller's death would be all over town by nightfall. Some would say she was a hero for protecting her daughter. Others would whisper that she was a troublemaker who'd caused the death of a prominent businessman. Linda didn't care what they said. She'd done what any mother would do. The question now was whether the legal system would recognize her rights, or whether George's influence extended beyond the grave. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Martin entered, his face serious. "Sheriff Brady wants to talk to us before dinner. He's got Pete Carson in custody." The man singing like a bird, trying to save his own neck. "What's he saying?" Linda asked. "That George planned the whole thing. Pete admits he helped forge Jake's signature on the land transfer papers, but claims he didn't know George was planning to kill Jake. He says George hired the man who shot your husband, a fellow named Cole Watson, who left town the same night." Linda's hands clenched into fists. "Does Pete know where this man went?" "Says he headed to California, but Pete's not sure. The sheriff sent a telegram to the territorial marshal asking them to investigate." Martin paused, then added, "There's more. Pete says Judge Henderson knew the papers were forged. George paid him $5,000 to approve the land transfer without too much scrutiny." Linda closed her eyes, feeling sick. The corruption had gone deeper than she'd imagined. What happens now? The judge is being questioned. If Pete's telling the truth, Henderson will be stripped of his position and likely face criminal charges. The territorial government is sending someone to oversee things until a new judge can be appointed. "And the ranch?" Linda asked quietly. Pete admitted the forgery in front of witnesses. "Your papers showing Jake's real will should be accepted without question now." "The ranch is yours, Linda. George's claim is dead along with him." Linda should have felt relief, but instead she just felt tired. Jake deserved better than this. "He built that ranch from nothing, and these men tried to steal it with lies and murder. But they didn't succeed," Martin said firmly. "Because of you. Because you were brave enough to fight back." Claire emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel and looking more like herself. "Mama, can we go home soon? I miss my bed." Linda knelt down and pulled her daughter into a hug. "Soon, baby. We just have to talk to the sheriff first, and then we can go home." The meeting with Sheriff Brady lasted 2 hours. Linda recounted everything that had happened, from George's ambush on the trail to the final confrontation in the desert. Pete Carson, sitting in a cell nearby, verified most of her story, though he tried to minimize his own role in the violence. "I never wanted anyone to get hurt," Pete kept saying. "I just needed the money George was offering. I've got debts, you understand. Gambling debts that needed paying. You helped forge documents and participated in an attempted kidnapping," Sheriff Brady said coldly.
"You're looking at serious prison time, Pete."
"The only question is how much." By the time they finished, the sun was setting over Silver Ridge. Linda and Claire had dinner in their hotel room, both too exhausted to face the curious stares of the dining room. Martin stayed with them, keeping watch as Linda had taught him during the dangerous weeks after Jake's death. "You should get some rest," Martin said finally. "Tomorrow we'll ride out to the ranch and start putting things back together." Linda nodded, but sleep was slow in coming. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw George's face twisted with greed, heard the gunshots echoing through the canyon, felt the terror of thinking she might lose Claire. She lay in the darkness, listening to her daughter's peaceful breathing from the next bed, and wondered how long it would take before she felt safe again. The answer came 3 days later, when the territorial government's handwriting expert arrived in Silver Ridge. Dr. Franklin Roberts was a precise, scholarly man who spent hours examining both sets of documents through magnifying glasses and under different types of light. His conclusion was definitive and damning. The signature on the land transfer papers attributed to Jacob Hayes is a forgery, and not even a particularly good one. The pressure points are wrong, the letter formation's inconsistent, and there are hesitation marks suggesting someone was copying rather than writing naturally. The signature on the will, however, matches perfectly with known samples of Mr. Hayes' handwriting. There is no doubt in my mind that the will is authentic and the transfer papers are fraudulent. Judge Henderson was arrested that afternoon, still protesting his innocence despite Pete Carson's testimony. A new judge, brought in from the territorial capital, formally recognized Linda's ownership of the ranch and ordered that all of George Miller's claims against the property be dismissed. Linda stood in the courtroom, holding Claire's hand as the new judge made his ruling official. Mrs. Hayes, this court recognizes you as the sole legal owner of the Hayes Ranch, comprising 640 acres with all buildings, livestock, and mineral rights. No one has any legal claim to challenge your ownership. This matter is closed. For the first time since Jake's death, Linda felt tears on her cheeks. Not tears of grief or fear, but of relief. It was finally over. The ranch was safe. Claire's future was secure. Jake's legacy would continue. Martin was waiting outside the courthouse with a wagon. "Ready to go home?" he asked with a smile. "More than ready," Linda replied. The ride back to the ranch took most of the afternoon. As they crested the final hill and the valley opened up before them, Linda's breath caught. There, in the golden afternoon light, was the ranch Jake had built. The house stood solid and welcoming, smoke rising from the chimney where their housekeeper had kept the fire going. The barn and corrals were just as they'd left them. The cattle grazed peacefully in the pastures, unaware of the battle that had been fought to protect them. "It's still here," Claire said wonderingly. "It's still ours." "It's still ours," Linda echoed. "And nobody's ever going to take it away." They spent the evening settling back in, Linda checking on every corner of the property to assure herself that nothing had been damaged or stolen during their absence. The housekeeper, a cheerful woman named Betty who'd worked for Jake's family for 20 years, had kept everything in perfect order. "I knew you'd win," Betty said confidently. "Jake chose well when he married you. You've got his strength, plus some of your own." That night, Linda tucked Claire into bed in her own room, in her own bed, surrounded by familiar things. "Mama," Claire said sleepily, "was Papa proud of us?" Linda thought about Jake, about the man who'd built this ranch with his own hands, who'd fought rustlers and drought and hard times to create something solid and lasting. "Yes, baby," she said softly. "I think he's very proud. We protected what he built. We kept our family together. That's what matters most." After Claire fell asleep, Linda walked through the house, running her hands along the walls Jake had raised, looking at the furniture he'd made, remembering the life they'd built together. The fight was over, but the real work was just beginning. She had a ranch to run, cattle to tend, a daughter to raise. There would be hard days ahead, challenges and setbacks and struggles. But Linda Hayes had walked through fire to keep her name and her daughter. She'd faced down armed men and corrupt officials. She'd outsmarted, outfought, and outlasted those who'd tried to take everything from her. If she could survive all that, she could handle anything the future might bring. As she locked the doors and checked the windows before bed, Linda made herself a promise. She would build on what Jake had started. She would make the ranch stronger, more prosperous, more secure. She would raise Claire to be strong and capable, to never back down from what was right, to fight for what was hers, and she would make sure that everyone in the territory knew that the Hayes Ranch was not for sale, not for stealing, and not for the taking. It belonged to Linda Hayes and her daughter, now and always. They'd paid for it in blood and courage, and they would hold it against all comers. The morning sun rose over the ranch, casting long shadows across the valley. Linda stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the new day begin. Somewhere out there, Cole Watson, the man who'd actually pulled the trigger on Jake, was still free. The territorial marshals were hunting him, but there was no guarantee he'd ever face justice. Linda had accepted that some things were beyond her control. She couldn't bring Jake back. She couldn't undo the corruption that had infected Silver Ridge. She couldn't erase the fear and trauma that Claire had experienced. But she could move forward. She could build a future. She could prove that a woman could run a ranch as well as any man, that justice sometimes prevailed over money and power, and that love and determination were stronger than greed and violence. Claire came out onto the porch, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Morning, Mama." "Morning, baby," Linda said, pulling her daughter close. "What do you want to do today?" "Can we check on the horses?" Claire asked. "I want to make sure Daisy's okay after everything that happened."
"We can do that," Linda agreed.
"And then we need to ride the fence line on the south pasture." Martin said some of the posts need replacing. "Papa used to let me help with that," Claire said quietly. "Then you'll help me," Linda said. "We'll do it together, just like your papa would have wanted." They walked toward the barn, mother and daughter, as the ranch came alive around them. Cowboys emerged from the bunkhouse, ready for the day's work. Cattle lowed in the distance. Birds sang in the cottonwood trees along the creek. Life went on, as it always did. Linda Hayes had walked away with her daughter and her name. She'd paid the price in fear and blood and sleepless nights, but she'd won. The ranch was theirs, earned not just through inheritance, but through courage and conviction. And that, Linda thought as she helped Claire saddle Daisy, was a legacy worth fighting for. Jake would have been proud. She was proud, and that was enough. The sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the valley, promising another day of hard work and small victories. Linda mounted her horse and waited for Claire to do the same. Together, they rode out to check the fence line, two survivors rebuilding their lives one day at a time. Behind them, the ranch stood solid and permanent, a testament to everything they'd fought to protect. Ahead of them, the future stretched out uncertain but full of possibility. Linda Hayes faced it the same way she'd faced everything else in her life, with determination, courage, and an unshakable conviction that she and her daughter deserved every acre of land that bore their name. They tried to sell her silence. They tried to steal her legacy. They tried to break her spirit and take her child. But Linda Hayes had walked through the fire and emerged stronger on the other side. She'd claimed her rightful inheritance and protected her daughter against impossible odds. Her name was Hayes. Her ranch was the Hayes Ranch. And nothing and nobody would ever change that again. The story of what happened in the canyons outside Silver Ridge would be told for years to come. Some versions would exaggerate Linda's heroism, making her larger than life. Others would downplay what she'd done, suggesting she'd been lucky rather than brave. Linda didn't care about the stories people told. She knew the truth. She'd fought for what was right, protected what was hers, and ensured that her daughter would grow up with the inheritance Jake had meant her to have. That was all that mattered. As they worked on the fence line that afternoon, Claire asked, "Mama, will bad men ever come after us again?" Linda paused in her work, considering her answer carefully. "Maybe," she said honestly. "There will always be people who want to take what isn't theirs. But now everyone knows we won't give up without a fight. That makes them think twice before trying." "I was so scared," Claire admitted, "when those men were shooting at us." "I was scared too," Linda said. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what needs to be done even though you're scared." Like Papa did. Exactly like Papa did. And like we'll keep doing every day for as long as we live on this ranch. Claire nodded slowly, absorbing this wisdom. "I want to learn to shoot better," she said, "so next time I can help protect us." Linda felt a pang in her heart at how quickly her daughter had been forced to grow up, but she also felt pride at Claire's determination to be strong.
All right, she agreed.
"We'll start practicing this weekend. But remember, the best fight is the one you don't have to have. We'll always try to solve problems peacefully first." They finished repairing the fence as the afternoon sun began its descent. Riding back to the ranch house, Linda felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. The land stretched out around them, beautiful and harsh and unforgiving, but theirs. Completely and unquestionably theirs. That night, after dinner, Linda sat at Jake's old desk and began going through the ranch accounts. There was much to do, debts to pay, deals to renegotiate, business relationships to repair after the chaos George Miller had caused. But Linda was good with numbers, better than Jake had been if she was honest, and she understood the cattle business as well as anyone. She worked late into the night making lists and calculations, planning for the future. When she finally climbed into bed, exhausted but satisfied, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Real, genuine hope for what lay ahead. Within a year, she'd paid off all their outstanding debts. Within 2 years, the Hayes Ranch was more profitable than it had ever been under Jake's management. Linda proved herself a shrewd negotiator and a careful steward of resources. Other ranchers, initially skeptical of dealing with a woman, came to respect her business acumen and fair dealing. Claire grew up strong and capable, learning to ride and rope and shoot alongside the cowboys. She never forgot the harrowing days when men tried to steal their legacy, but she didn't let fear define her. Instead, she learned from her mother's example that determination and courage could overcome even the longest odds. The territorial marshal eventually tracked down Cole Watson, the man who'd killed Jake. He was arrested in San Francisco and brought back to face trial. Linda attended every day of the proceedings, staring across the courtroom at the man who'd made her a widow. When he was convicted and sentenced to hang, she felt no joy, only a sense of closure. "It's over now," Martin said as they left the courthouse after the verdict. "Jake can rest in peace." "We can all rest in peace," Linda replied. "But only after we've done the day's work." Years passed. The ranch prospered. Claire grew into a strong young woman who could run the property as well as her mother. Linda's hair gained streaks of silver, and her face showed lines earned through worry and hard work, but her eyes remained sharp and her spirit unbroken. Other women in the territory, seeing what Linda had accomplished, found courage to stand up for their own rights. Some fought legal battles over inheritance. Others started businesses or demanded fair treatment from banks and merchants. Linda Hayes became, without intending to, a symbol of what women could achieve when they refused to be silenced or sidelined. She never remarried despite several offers. The ranch and Claire were enough for her. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she'd sit on the porch and talk to Jake's memory, telling him about the day's events and asking his opinion on difficult decisions. She never heard answers, but somehow the act of talking to him helped her think through problems clearly. On the 10th anniversary of Jake's death, Linda and Claire rode out to the small cemetery on the hill where he was buried. They'd maintained his grave carefully over the years, keeping it free of weeds and marking it with a simple but solid stone marker. "I hope he knows we kept his dream alive," Claire said, kneeling to place flowers on the grave. "He knows," Linda said with certainty. "Wherever he is, he knows we fought for this place. He knows we won." They stood together in the afternoon sun, mother and daughter, looking out over the valley that bore their name. The Hayes Ranch would endure for generations, built on a foundation of love, sacrifice, and an unbreakable determination to hold on to what was rightfully theirs. Linda Hayes had walked away with her daughter and her name. But more than that, she'd walked into a future she'd built with her own hands, answering to no one, bowing to no pressure, accepting no limitations on what a woman could achieve. They'd tried to sell her silence with threats and violence. She'd answered with courage and conviction. They'd tried to steal her legacy with forged papers and corrupt judges. She'd answered with truth and perseverance. They'd tried to break her spirit with fear and intimidation. She'd answered with unshakable determination. In the end, Linda Hayes had won not just a legal battle over land ownership, but something far more important. She'd won the right to define herself, to live life on her own terms, to build a future without compromise or apology. The sun set over the Hayes Ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Linda and Claire rode home together, their shadows stretching long across the land they'd fought so hard to keep. Behind them, Jake's grave stood as a reminder of what had been lost. Ahead of them, the ranch house glowed with welcoming light, a promise of what had been gained. Some stories end with revenge. Some end with justice. This story ended with something better. Survival, legacy, and the simple but profound triumph of a woman who refused to let anyone take away her name, her daughter, or her rightful place in the world. Linda Hayes had walked through fire and emerged unburned. She'd faced down evil men and corrupt systems. She'd protected her child and claimed her inheritance. And in doing so, she'd proven that courage wasn't measured by size or strength or gender, but by the willingness to stand up when everything seemed lost and say simply and firmly, "No more." That night, as Linda tucked Claire into bed one last time before her daughter became too old for such rituals, Claire asked the question that had been on her mind all day. "Mama, if you could go back and change things, would you?" Linda thought carefully before answering. "If I could bring your father back, yes, I'd change everything in a heartbeat. But I can't do that. Given what actually happened, would I change how we fought back?"
No, we did what we had to do.
"We survived. We won. That's all anyone can ask." "I'm glad we fought back," Claire said sleepily. "I'm glad we didn't let them win." "So am I, baby," Linda said, kissing her daughter's forehead. "So am I." She left Claire's room and walked through the quiet house, checking locks and windows one final time before bed. It was a habit she'd never quite broken, even though the danger had long since passed. Some things stayed with you, changed you in ways both visible and invisible. But Linda Hayes didn't regret those changes. They'd made her harder when she needed to be hard, softer when she needed to be soft, and always, always certain of who she was and what she stood for. She was Linda Hayes, owner of the Hayes Ranch, mother of Claire Hayes, and widow of Jake Hayes. She'd earned those names through love and loss, through courage under fire, through determination in the face of overwhelming odds. They'd tried to sell her silence. She'd walked away with her daughter and her name, and in the end, that was all the victory she needed.